I began changing the title of my presentation, with your permission. Okay, and the final title is Challenges of Globalization and Integration for Jamaican and Trinidadian Entrepreneurs. Okay, now, I have kind of a captive audience because you cannot get out with the rain, so I will try to summarize my paper in the first part and then read the last part of it just because of English problems, and I feel secure at that part. In the first part of the paper, I kind of review major developments in CARICOM from 1984, that is from the Nassau meeting of 1984, going through the declaration of Grand ANSE in 1989 to show how much of the decisions that were taken at those meetings have been implemented by now. And I conclude in this first part of the paper that the rate of implementation has been higher in these 6 or 7 years than what CARICOM has been able to implement in the 14 or 15 years before that. That's my first conclusion. Then, in the second part of the paper, I look at the political actors, mainly of the more developed nations, that's Jamaica and Trinidad-Tobago, and the role these political actors have played in the decisions taken at Nassau and Grand ANSE and in the rate of implementation. And what I found out is that the political actor or political group that was more active getting decisions approved by CARICOM, by the heads of government of CARICOM, and getting decisions implemented were entrepreneurs. There is a small discussion about whom we are calling entrepreneurs, what kind of entrepreneurs, how we found this. I'm not going to discuss all that. If you have specific questions, you may ask them later. And I'm going to read the last part of the paper with your permission. In the last 3 or 4 years, CARICOM has become more dynamic, relatively of course, and has achieved more than in the previous 15 years, as well as venturing into discussions to open up and deepen regional integration. In this process, entrepreneurs have been successful in influencing developments within the organization, mostly by securing implementation of decisions. Several questions arise from this. What is the interest of entrepreneurs, especially from the more developed nations of CARICOM, in effecting economic integration now? And what are the basic objectives of the reactivation of integration we are witnessing in the English-speaking Caribbean? We will try to answer, however, in a preliminary fashion, these 2 questions. The desire of entrepreneurs of the English-speaking Caribbean to promote a swift process of economic integration relates to their need to protect every mechanism that grants them preferential economic treatment while adjusting to economic globalization. The assumption of a global, supranational character on the part of capital that can even challenge the priorities of national governments and turn national industries into components of global ones has fostered the formation of large economic blocs around nations like Germany, Japan, and the United States. Promotion of these blocs rests more in the hands of the private sector than of governments themselves. And the result is an increased level of monopolistic integration by big business. The English-speaking Caribbean falls within the area of influence of the US and will be incorporated in the hemispheric bloc President Bush announced in 1989 under the name of the Enterprise of the Americas Initiative, EAI. CARICOM recognized the importance of the EAI for the English-speaking Caribbean, and in 1990 it appointed a technical group to evaluate the proposal. A year later, its preliminary report recommended the signing of a multilateral accord between CARICOM and the US, which would preserve the terms of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, the Lomé Convention, the Accord of Free Trade with Canada and CARICOM, as well as the Caribbean Basin Initiative. Following the recommendations of the technical group's report in July 1991, CARICOM and the Trade Department of the U.S. signed a frame into the EAI. Two aspects of the EAI and CARICOM's position on this are worth discussing here. First, the continuity of traditional patterns of relations between the U.S. and the rest of the hemisphere, and second, CARICOM's emphasis on the protection of all its preferential treatment arrangements. The U.S. proposal follows known patterns of its previous programs for Latin America and the Caribbean, such as the need to achieve certain prerequisites on the part of the other parties involved in order to enter the accord, and unilateral decisions on what goods would receive tariff reductions. In other words, the EAI is an U.S. proposal unilaterally decided, and as such it gives little leeway to the other participants, national governments or integration organizations, to effect major changes in it. In fact, by the time CARICOM signed the Framework Accord, similar ones had already been signed between the U.S. and the governments of Chile, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, and Honduras. Moreover, as the three components of the EAI, trade, debt, and investment, can be negotiated on a case-by-case basis, some CARICOM member nations have already done so, especially on the question of the external debt. The second aspect of importance, and the one that probably attracts the most interest of regional entrepreneurs, is the preservation of preferential treatment for CARICOM production. This is shown in the specific references made to Chaguaramas, Lomé, CARICAN, and the CBI. Let us discuss here some of the most obvious problems that CARICOM entrepreneurs could encounter in their participation in the EAI without assurances of continued preferential treatment. One is the question of the possible disappearance of the comparative advantages for maquila industry, which is at present one of the most important sectors of Caribbean exports. Maquila would lose its raison d'etre within a regime of free intrahemispheric trade, and this type of industry would tend to disappear, leaving serious doubts about the capacity of sub-regional entrepreneurs to substitute it with a more competitive exporting industry. A World Bank study has already pointed out that the free trade agreement with the U.S. would grant more advantages to North American exporters, negatively affecting Latin America and the Caribbean, except in the cases of Mexico and Brazil, which probably would provide almost 90% of the area's exports to the U.S. Even if the hemispheric free trade area does not materialize in the short or medium term, the incorporation of Mexico in the NAFTA could mean the end of existing advantages for the Caribbean. As David Lewis observes, change in the relative position of Mexico and the CBI countries vis-à-vis the U.S. would occur not because the CBI countries' access would be made less, but because their Mexican competitors' access would be made greater. Yes, but because their Mexican competitors' access would be made greater. The sub-region is already experiencing the negative consequences of globalization by means of, 1, a sharp decline in the international price of its traditional exports, with some being substituted by technological developments. Second, the loss of comparative advantages like relatively abundant cheap labor and nearness to the markets of Canada and the US, due to the increased demand actually for skilled workers. And third, a decrease of productive investment into the sub-region because of the existence of more competitive markets. Globalization is also behind the creation of NAFTA and the proposed EAI, which, as seen, could mean the demise of industries initiated under preferential accords like the CBI. The challenge of globalization to the entrepreneurial sector of CARICOM is clear. If we accept what Hilbert Watson has pointed out regarding these entrepreneurs, that is, the fact that they have experienced little exposure to competition in world capitalist production, and consequently they are unable to adjust to world changes with rapidity, the outlook is even bleaker. Two examples can be given to substantiate this claim. First, the influx of US funds into Jamaica between 1981 and 1984 as part of the American policy to support the JLP government of Edward Seaga, an enormous amount of foreign currency accumulated by Trinidad due to the boom in international oil prices in the 1970s. None of these massive entries of capital into the most developed nations of the English-speaking Caribbean managed to change their economic structures to facilitate a new linking to the international economy. If this is so, entrepreneurs are practically fighting for survival by promoting economic integration within CARICOM as a way to facilitate their insertion in the global economy. The common market would mean the elimination of all barriers to intra-regional trade, something that, when applied without exceptions, would exclude from the regional market uncompetitive industries and shift capital and labor towards more efficient and competitive areas because of the free circulation of money and workers within CARICOM. Not all entrepreneurs would be able to achieve permanence in the new situation. The larger ones would probably be more likely to survive by promoting region-wide corporations or by entering into joint ventures. There might be a way, however, for the small entrepreneurs to adapt, as now a good number of small enterprises work under contract for medium and large ones when the latter do not have the capacity to fulfill orders, and this strategy could be important or more important in the future. But still, large and small entrepreneurs of the English-speaking Caribbean would need preferential treatment in the exporting sector. They feel that this can only be secured through collective negotiations by means of CARICOM. Entrepreneurs still have an opportunity because US economic policy in the hemisphere, with the support of the World Bank and the IMF, rests on an enlarged role for the private sector. In other words, the promotion of economic development has shifted from governments to the private sector, and this policy needs the existence of such a sector or its creation where it does not exist, or where it is not powerful enough to take up the leading role it is expected to play, a fact that may work to the advantage of CARICOM entrepreneurs. Our second question regarded the objectives of economic integration now being promoted by CARICOM and regional entrepreneurs. It should be obvious that these objectives have changed considerably from those of the 1960s and 1970s. More integrated, at that time the objective was to get a more integrated and independent economy as the basis for a more independent political behavior in the world arena. Now the aim is not this, but to foster sub-regional integration as a necessary previous step for a better vertical integration within the hemispheric bloc centered around the preeminence of the US. In conclusion, economic integration within CARICOM seems nearer now than in the previous years. In all, the active role of the entrepreneurs in CARICOM's discussion is kind of a positive or derogatory view of the role of the state and of the role of politicians in the implementation of regional economic integration. At this moment, entrepreneurs are pushing for integration, using more their corporative strength, their use of the mass media and their organizations that even political parties of the region. And I think this is a development that, even if not discussed here, is worth to be taken into consideration because it may have serious repercussions for political situation within these nations. And that's kind of an addendum. Thank you, Hilbert.